Welcome to part 6, Music and Stories, the story of my life. And this chapter should be entitled My Least Favorite Year, because this guy was in big trouble that year. In fact, spoiler alert, it may be one of the worst years of my life. There were 3 things that contributed to how bad a year it was. One, like everyone else in my school and in other schools, it was college, and it was the fear of what am I going to do after high school. And the pressure for me to get into a really good college was immense. The other thing was me. I was my own worst enemy. I was obstinate. I was stubborn. I had really, really bad judgment. And I thought I knew everything. I was a privileged white teen from the suburbs. And I was also the king of talking back to my parents, which only made home life worse because that was the biggest problem. This happy family from my bar mitzvah was in deep trouble. Rochelle and Jack were on the verge of hating each other and separating, which they did a year later. They argued about everything. Their worldviews could not have been more different. There was always tension at home. There was such tension that I developed colitis, okay? Now, my mother had a worldview that only the worst was going to happen, and I can't blame her. She was a Holocaust survivor. So she warned me about everything, and then warned me while it was happening, and then after it happened, she'd tell me, see, I told you so. My dad was just the opposite. He was the kind of guy who said, let him make his own mistakes. He'll learn better if he makes his own mistakes. But by the time this year was over, I had fulfilled my mother's worst fears, and I had let my father down by not really accepting the responsibility for my actions. Let me see if I can give you some perspective of how my family viewed getting into college. 3rd grade, I remember this night. I'm lying in my bed, and I'm in 3rd grade, and my father walks by the door, and I got Murray the K on, and I'm listening to Murray the K, and he says, oh, how are things going, Alan? I said, great, He says, how's school? And as he says that, he comes into the room and sits down on the bed. You want to talk about school? Now, I'm getting a little worried here because he knew about school. He had my report card. He says, turn that off. And so, are you doing well? And I told him, of course, the dilemma that I had, which is the 3 Allens. This is a dilemma I had for years and years and years. There were 3 Allens in my class and in my Hebrew school class. There was Alan Feinberg, who was the top of the class, really smart, could remember everything. And in fact, he skipped a year later on. So he was number 1. Close behind him was Alan Chesson, another smart kid. Running up 3rd, Alan Arkish. I mean, these guys, they learned to have Torah really quickly later on. And even in 3rd grade, we collected baseball cards. They knew the statistics of every Yankee. I was always chasing them, and I always felt inferior. What should I do, Dad? And my father says, I don't think you are really understanding the situation. Let's start with kindergarten, because in kindergarten, you're just a kid. You're just, I didn't say anything to you. And in 1st grade, we were very worried because you weren't reading well. But then all of a sudden, you seemed to figure that out and seemed to be okay. And then you were reading all the time. And in 2nd grade, you started to get decent grades and seemed to understand how the system worked. But that's all done. You're in 3rd grade now. Life really begins in 3rd grade. Because in 3rd grade, you have to accept responsibility for what you're going to become. There's no more kidding around. You've got to look towards college and beyond college, the kind of career and life that you're going to have. Do I make myself clear? And with that, he leaves. And I'm sitting there thinking, and I had enough self-awareness to go, holy shit, that was a little harsh. I'm 8 years old. I'm 8 years old, and he's making me think about what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. On one hand, I was like, that's crazy. On the other hand, it stayed with me forever. That fear of not getting into the right college followed me all the way into senior year at Fort Lee High School. And this is what I looked like senior year. That's my senior picture. Okay, B pluses, A minus, that was me. High 600s in my SATs and low 700s, so pretty good. My teachers, recommendations. What did my teachers think of me? Not much. Mr. Kelly, remember I told you about him? Well, he had been telling the teachers all about me in the teacher's lounge, and I was getting a lot of strange looks because I was the school commie. I was the school person who always thought the opposite of everyone else. So it was time for me to meet the man who was going to determine my fate, who's going to guide me into college, which then, of course, would carry me for the rest of my life. It was time for me to meet with the school's driver's ed teacher and college counselor, Mr. Cancelosi. So I step into his office, and he's got all my grades there, and he's got the results of this test. I can't remember the name of the test, but it was something like Leopold and Loeb test. And every kid in New Jersey took this test. And the idea was it would tell you what your career should be. I mean, it was, all right, it had questions in it like, you've got 2 hours free in the afternoon. Would you rather read a book, go for a walk, call a friend, or take apart the engine in your father's car? It was that lame. But Jersey believed in that test. And Mr. Cancelosi is looking through that test, and he says to me, well, I got your results here for the Leopold and Loeb. Very interesting, Alan. It says here that maybe you should become a psychologist or a forest ranger. These are the choices, okay? He said that. He didn't say these are the choices, but you can't make this shit up. I mean, psychologist, forest ranger, where did they get this stuff? And I kind of intimated I wasn't that interested in that stuff. And then he says to me, so what are you interested in, Alan? I mean, what would you like to study in college? And I kind of blurted it out. I said, I really like movies. Is there a place where I could learn about film in college? So this is 1965. The film schools aren't anywhere. And Mr. Cancelosi kind of looks at me for a really long time. And I realize he's never heard of this. And then he says, geez, I've never heard of this. Let me look through a couple of reference books. And he does. And he says, well, you could study film. Well, there's only 4 places that teach it. Boston University, NYU, USC, that's way out in Los Angeles, and UCLA, that's way on the other coast. Okay, Alan, why don't you do this? Why don't you study psychology, become a psychologist, and you can go to the movies at night? Thank you, Mr. Cancelosi, for your opinion. But I got to take this opinion home and tell my family about it. So I tell them the whole thing, and I tell them about the psychology and so forth. Everything that I say is making them very, very upset because, again, it was an excuse to have tension in the house. And when I said that I wanted to study film, well, that was the end of that discussion. Now, my father had studied to be an artist, and he had not been able to make a living at it. And the last thing he wanted to do is have his son make the same mistake. My mother wanted me to be a doctor. My father wanted for me to be a lawyer or switch it around. But I was going to become a professional, and there would be no more talk about film school. And I better get into an Ivy League school. So I started looking through catalogs and Ivy League schools, and there's one that really stood out to me, and that was Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island. And the more I read about it and the more I looked at it, it looked really appealing. And so I started to correspond, and I got the information and filled out all the forms and tried to actually get in early admissions. I was that sold on Brown, and within a couple of weeks, I was going to go up there and have my interview. Now, music was still a very, very important part of my life. And it was a time when you could listen to the radio and music like this would come out. I never heard anything like this. I mean, it was bluesy, it was R&B, it had so much soul. It's the Animals. And I knew it had been a folk song, but this kind of grabbed you. I mean, these guys are working class band from England. Now, the lead singer is right there, Eric Burden. The wonderful organ that's being played is the great Alan Price. And interestingly, the bass player in the back, Chaz Chandler, he discovered a guitar player in the Village by the name of Jimi Hendrix. So I really like the Animals. Here's like a greatest hits album of theirs. And I loved this sound. I love when white boys sang the blues. And some of the songs that they sang about had the same concerns as mine. This song, Don't Let Me Be Misunderstood, is practically my life story at the time. And they did a song called Boom, 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 and we got to get out of this place. I mean, this felt like it was going into my heart. And I wasn't the only kid in Jersey who felt that way about the Animals. There was a guy near Asbury Park who was absorbing this the same way. That's right, Bruce has said over and over again how much he loves the Animals. In fact, this album has many riffs from this song in it. Badlands is kind of this song played upside down and backwards. Now, I bought Animalization, which is another great Animals tune, and it's just all their stuff. I'll play another one. It's great intros, and their whole ethos led me to start investigating movies made in England at that time. And there was a whole bunch of movies that was called the British New Wave, the kitchen sink school of realistic movies. And one of them that really captured it for me was The Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner. Now, this movie is about a kid who's in reform school, and he has a lot of talent for running. And it's about the big race for the championship, and the whole school is cheering him on. And as he's running, he has flashbacks to his life and how bad his life is, and it goes back and forth. And like, this is an image from that movie. You get the idea. Now, other movies of that ilk that I really loved was This Sporting Life. This is by the great director Lindsay Anderson. More on him in a little bit. This is Richard Harris. And it's about a rugby player and just trying to pull himself up in the rough world that he lives in. And another couple was Billy Liar. They were all had young heroes in it that were alienated. And Billy Liar can't seem to get out of his own way. He's stuck in this little home with his parents and in a lousy job, but he has these fantasies. Just like that's staring out the window, he'd have these fantasies and he'd be the king of a country and he'd be a hero. And then one day in the town square, he meets someone. And we meet this person also. And it's one of the most greatest introductions of anyone in any movie. It's Julie Christie. And him and Julie Christie developed this relationship, and they're gonna run away together. He's gonna leave this gray city behind. And at the last minute, he can't do it. He doesn't have the inner strength, and he goes home. I mean, he doesn't go to London with Julie Christie. That's tragedy. And here's another one, Morgan. Now, Morgan is so alienated, he thinks he's an ape. He runs around acting like an ape, and he has fantasies of being in the jungle. So this is another good one. But the one that really got me is this one. It was a little later. This is If by the great Lindsay Anderson. That's Malcolm McDowell in his first part. And it's about a young, strong man who's determined to do things on his terms. That's Malcolm McDowell in a private school in England. And the school does everything it can to break him. And corporal punishment, they whip him badly. And he develops this anger for the fact that he wants to be different and they want him to be like everyone else. And at the high school, this private school's graduation, him and his friends take out machine guns and bombs and kill all the teachers and all the parents and blow up the school. Sound familiar? Sound like it was an influence? Great, great movie. It won the Cannes Film Festival. And then this movie, Oh Lucky Man. Now, you're probably wondering why it's written all over it. Well, that's Malcolm signed this. And Malcolm and I worked together several times. It's like working with your hero. I love this movie. We worked together on Get Crazy, where he played a rock singer called Reggie Wanker. And on Heroes, he was a major character, and a couple other TV series. And sitting there with him and being able to talk about my hero, Lindsay Anderson, and Stanley Kubrick, and him telling you all about Clockwork Orange and how he created the character of Alex with Stanley Kubrick. I mean, it's one of the things that's why I do this for a living. I mean, that's why I make movies and TV shows, to relive all this stuff that I saw that influenced me so much. Now, what's so great about this movie is that it's, oddly enough, it's kind of a musical. Malcolm wrote it. It's about a young man trying to find his way in the world. And it starts off with a band playing in a recording studio, and the director, Lindsay Anderson, is sitting there. And the guy who's singing the song, the person who is the creator of all the music in the movie, is a guy by the name of Alan Price, the keyboard player for the Animals. You see, yeah. So he not only is in that scene, he shows up in the movie as part of a band, and then he's hitchhiking along a road and gets into their van and joins the band. It's very meta. It works on lots of levels, and the songs help tell the story. It's a great, great movie. Here's a nice picture. That's the kind of guy he was. How cool was that? I think I got a hat like that at one point. So they tried to keep the Animals together, and they came back together. They had split up and didn't work out. That's the way it goes. But, you know, they did some great, great work together. Now, me and my friends all saw those movies together, and we were a very close-knit group. And one of the obsessions that we had was J.D. Salinger, Catcher in the Rye. We started to dress like Holden Caulfield. My friend Dennis and I, so it's like we would wear raincoats, you know, and scarves. And Dennis actually wore a hunting hat like Holden Caulfield. And he would write passages from this book and from Franny and Zoe on the inside lining of his raincoat. And we started to really believe in this family called the Glass family, which was what Franny and Zoe has written about in a couple other of Salinger's books. And so I had to do an English paper or a book report on a book in senior year of high school, and I did it on Franny and Zoe. And I handed in, and then when it came time to get my grade, I get the grade back, there's no grade on it. And I said to the teacher, there's no grade. And she says, well, I cannot accept this. I found out I cannot accept this book report. Why not? Well, this Franny and Zoe book is not in the school library, and you can only do a book report on a book that's in the school or the, you know, the public library. Where is this written? I never knew this. And why is this a banned book? Look, here's my book report. I did it on time. I don't understand what you're talking about. You've got to grade it. And she says, I don't like your attitude. And I said, well, it's what I believe. Freedom of speech. She says, you're going down to the school disciplinarian. So me and this teacher go down to the school disciplinarian, Mr. Ramondo. And he starts reading me the Riot Act about, you're writing a book report about a banned book. I don't think he even thought about this. I said, okay, I need to know what's banned about this book, because, you see, in Catcher in the Rye, it kind of makes weird sense because there's a 4-letter word. Now, the 4-letter word, the main character is trying to protect everyone from the 4-letter word. And you're trying to protect everyone from literature in a 4-letter word, so you ban this book. It's wrong thinking. I can kind of understand it, but you need to tell me what is so bad in Franny and Zoe. Tell me. And it turns out that neither of them have ever read it. And when I found that out, I said, okay, you guys read the book, and then you can point out the passages that you find offensive. And that, it got heated, and they backed down. And Mr. Armando just gave me the eye. I was on his list. This was going down on my record, a permanent record that was going to follow me the rest of my life. And I got it, like a B+, A- on this. You have to begrudgingly admit it was a pretty smart book report. But to win the battle, you know what I mean? So it was time for me to go up and to Brown University and have my interview. So my first plane ride, I flew up to Providence, and I get to Brown University, and it's gorgeous. It's the fall in New England, and this old campus is giant trees and 200-year-old buildings, and everyone dressed collegiate and looking very cool. And they assigned me a dorm room with like a whole bunch of beds in it, and I go in there, and just as I sit down and stuff, the door flies open, and in comes 10 of the coolest college guys I'd ever seen. They had a jaunty air about them. They had scarves around their necks. You know, one of the guys is being carried because he had hurt his leg. It's the rugby team from Dartmouth. I mean, wow. And they were joking and kidding around and told relax, and whatever nervousness I had went away, and they said, come on, let's go eat, come with us. And they took me out to dinner. I mean, it was the school cafeteria, but still I'm hanging with the Dartmouth, you know, guys, the rugby team. And then after dinner, they bought beer, and they gave me 2 cans of beer. So I drink my beer, and I start walking around the campus at night. And it's fall, and music is echoing out of this one window where a student has placed his stereo. And I hear this song playing across the campus. It's from the Rolling Stones, Out of Our Heads. It's one of my favorite Rolling Stones songs. And I'm looking up at the stars and these beautiful old buildings and the crisp college, you know, that's crisp air in the fall and the cold leaves, and I'm thinking, this is it. The Ivy League. This is where I deserve to be. I'm going to get into this school, you know? This is for me. Tomorrow I got that interview. I'm going to really do it in the interview. Well, I booted the interview really badly. I was ill-prepared. For all my ridiculous hubris and ego, I was really not prepared for that level. And I know it now because I've seen what my daughters go through to get into college. But I was not prepared, and Fort Lee High School didn't prepare me, and I just fucked it up, you know? I just didn't have anything clever to say and just sat there nervously. And all the way home on the train, I realized that I was not getting in on early admissions to Brown. I would roll that over into regular, and I started thinking about the other 4 schools that I would need to apply to. And I ultimately applied to Bowdoin, to Tufts, University of Rochester, and my safety school was this party school in Connecticut called the University of Bridgeport. Now, while all this grief was going on, the one thing I had that really made me feel better was my friends. And we all hung out and loved, and we still love music, and we did everything together. And there was this troubadour that we started to like, and I say he's a troubadour because that's how his first album is. His name was Donovan. And it was just the kind of emo music of the 60s that appealed to me. You know, his folkiness. He was being called the new Dylan, the English Dylan. In fact, if you see the Dylan documentary, Don't Look Back, in front of Dylan, they call him the new Dylan. Well, I won't ruin it for you. You should see Don't Look Back because Donovan's good in it, but Dylan is awesome in it. And he kept changing the style of what he was going to do. His second album, he starts having strings on it, and the songs are like fairy tales. And also, he does political songs, so we're loving Donovan a lot. And then we notice that he's going to be playing at Town Hall on this first tour in New York City. So we see what day the tickets are going to go on sale, and we got to get out of school to go. We got to get those tickets. It snows. That's right. It starts snowing on Monday. It snows all the way to Sunday night, and they call off school. We got a snow day. So me and Susan Miller trudge through the snow to the George Washington Bridge, get on the subway, and go downtown and go to Town Hall, and we're the only people online. And we get tickets for Donovan in the front row. And so we are there for his first American concert. Now, Donovan's music didn't stand still. With each album, he changed. And this was the beginning of his real psychedelic era. And this was one of the albums of that time that it's like a soundtrack to that time, because this is a great song called Season of the Witch. And he wrote songs about the scene that he saw everywhere he went. And they're wonderful imaginative backing tracks and a lot of interesting instruments on them. It was rock taking a step forward, and the words are imaginative and very different. There's no just I love you, you love me. These are stories. And his album right after that was a big hit, Mellow Yellow, and it had a hit single called I'm Just Wild, Mellow Yellow. I'm just wild about Saffron. Saffron's wild about me. We love Donovan. In that song, he tells everyone that the electrical banana is going to be the next craze, and everyone starts smoking bananas, thinking they're going to get high. Anyway, he went on to do other records. I'm just telling you about Donovan, and if you're interested, there's a greatest hits album, 2 CDs. You could probably pick it up really cheaply. You will like Donovan. Now, the next thing that stupid Alan does, well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. I don't think I've mentioned to you the fact that I loved cars. About from when I was 12, 13 years old, I started making model cars. And I started customizing them and really spending, obsessive, right? Spending a lot of time designing these cars, staging car shows for my friends. We'd all design model cars and give prizes and stuff. And slot racers. I'd go into New York and race these little cars on these tracks. I was obsessed with cars, and then, of course, real cars, sports car racing. We used to go to sports car racing events and things. So when it came time for me to get my driver's license, it was like, all right, I'm ready for this. And I failed. I failed the drive, right? I failed my driving test, and it was so embarrassing. All my friends were like, I thought you had this. I thought you were like all about the cars. I failed the test. And then I took it again, and I passed the test. So I get home, I'm very excited about this. Mom, I got my license. Let me try driving your car. And she had a Buick Riviera. I learned on my father's Chevelle or Chevy 2 or something like that. And she had this Buick Riviera, which was kind of like a Thunderbird in that style. It was like a touring big sedan and huge engine. And no traction in back. It was a pig to drive, really overpowered and guzzled gas. But I wanted to drive it that night, and of course, my mother has the fears and all this stuff, and I hear it's going to rain, and oh, Mom, it'll be a couple of drops. Trust me, she says, I don't know. I says, well, I got my license. She talked her into it, kind of beat her up about it. And I get in the car, and as I'm driving, it sure enough begins to rain. And when it first starts to rain, and the water mixes with the grease and oil on the street and how slippery it could get, I know that now. That night I didn't. And I'm going a little too fast on Palisade Avenue. Light changes, I hit the brakes, and I lost control of the car. And the car spins and does a 180-degree spin, 360 around in the middle of the street. Luckily, I didn't hit anybody and nobody hit me. All right? So glad I survived that. Came home, how was the drive? Everything's fine, right? Now, a normal person would take that as an omen, as a lesson, and say, you know what? Don't do stupid things like that again. No, because that weekend, my parents went out and they let me have the car for the first time that weekend on my own with my friends. Not the Buick Riviera, my father's white Chevelle. And we're driving across Englewood Cliffs, New Jersey, with 2 6-packs of beer under the seats. We had taken them out of the 6-packs and we had put them under the seats to hide them. They were there just in case. And sure enough, the just in case happens, because in my rear view mirror, a cop car appears and he follows me. And he follows me for a 1/4 mile, and he follows me for a 1/2 mile, and he keeps getting closer, and he's watching me, and I am getting more and more nervous. And I'm spending too much time looking in the mirror because I miss a stop sign. I go through it, and every one of my friends yells at the same time, stop sign, and I hit the brake. Car skids to a stop, and all the beer bottles roll forward. And the cop got the light on now, and he's walking to get out of the car, and everyone's trying to, I can't even show you what they were doing, trying to get those beer bottles under the seat. Comes up to me, and it's like that cop in Psycho. He's looking right through me. And what do you think you were doing? And you went through that stop sign. I'm sorry, officer. I've only had my license for a week, and I was very, very nervous. Oh, only a week? Then it's time you had a lesson about driving safely. Gives me a ticket. He leaves. I got to go home and explain this ticket to my parents, and then I have to appear in court. Because in Jersey, there's some law that your first ticket, if you're a certain age, you got to appear in court before the judge. And the judge reads me the right. Like, you've been driving 1 week and you already got a ticket. And I explained how nervous I was. And the only thing good about it is the judge fined me, which I had to pay, but he didn't give me any points on my driving record. Okay. So you'd think 2 times, right? He's going to learn. Well, I think I told you the story of what happened to me on that ice cream truck, right? But that wasn't my fault. That's like a what do they call that in golf? Like a do-over or something, the thing we keep giving Trump. And anyway, that's 3 times. Okay. Here it is. Now, I used to like to pretend I was a race driver, And it's the fall, it's the middle of September, and Palisades Amusement Park is closed, and I've got the car, and I got 2 of my friends, Dennis and my friend Bob Fink, and we're driving around, and I say, let's go down to the parking lot for Palisades Amusement Park, down by the river edge. There's nothing around there. And we go down there, and I start driving. It's all gravel. So I'm driving really fast along this gravel and spinning around things, on the gravel and all that. And trying to pretend I'm a race driver. And I'm racing around this stuff. And out of nowhere, 2 cop cars are there. And get out of the car. Get out of the car. What do you think you were doing? You must be the stupidest person I've ever met. Do you know what's across the street? And I look, and right across the street from the Palisades Amusement Park parking lot is the River Edge police station. And there's all the cops who are on duty on that Sunday are standing out there looking at this jerk who is driving recklessly in front of the police station. Come with us. You, the stupid one. We're all going into jail. You're getting in a cell. So we walk to the cell. We walk across, and the cops are all laughing at me, looking at me and my friends as we walk into the police station. And they get my name in, and they tell my friend Dennis and Bob, you 2, get out of town. Don't hitchhike, walk. They're gone. I get thrown into a cell. Where's your parents? What's your home number? I said, well, they're not home. Where are they? I said, they're actually on the golf course playing golf. Give them the name of the country club, and they've got to get my parents off of the golf course here, right? This is just awful. And I'm sitting there in this cell, and in the cell next to me is a young woman, maybe a year or 2 older than me, a real Jersey girl, tough looking with a lot of eye makeup, and they used to wear these like ballet shoes, and it was a style then. And every cop that comes out knows her name and is giving her a hard time because she's in jail almost every other week. And they all went to high school with her mom. So they're trying to, straighten her out. You know what I mean? And the mom is going to be there. And it's just, we are 2 losers. And then my father and mother show up. And I could tell that they have been fighting in the car all the way from the country club, right? Does that make it sound like a privileged jerk that I was? So my father's got smoke coming out of his ears, and they give me a ticket and another fine, and it's going on my insurance and all that. And he's going to drive me home in the Chevelle, and my mother's going to take the other car. And in the ride home, he is screaming at me like, I trusted you, and every time I trust you, you betray my trust. You let me down. And when I get home, the 2 of them let me have it. For so long, my sister kind of hides in her room from this. And basically, I'm grounded. For a month, I can't go out of the house, and I can't drive until the new year. So it's like 2.5 months. So I spend all my time, in my bedroom, reading and doing my homework because I got to get into a good school. And now I'm taking this advanced lit course, a world lit. So I'm reading all these big books, and the solace that I have in this room comes from these guys, right? Rubber Soul and the Beatles. Thank you, guys. You made that period of my life, hearing you sing those songs, It's Only Love and That Is All. And, in my life, this is one of the greatest albums of all time. What can I say? It's Rubber Soul. So I mentioned that I was reading all these books, and I had this new teacher, and her name was Mrs. Kissel. And Mrs. Kissel taught World Lit on there. It's like and she also taught creative writing. And you took one of each. And the books that she gave me to read were like Voltaire's Candide. And she introduced us to Kafka and Metamorphosis and The Hunger Artist and Nikolai Gogol, all these, Edgar Allan Poe, all these great short stories. It's a funny thing, I'm reading this short story by Gogol, which is called The Cloak. And it's a great story. And as I'm reading it, it sounds very familiar. And then I realized that all the years I went to this Zionist youth camp, the leader of the camp would tell a story around the campfire as it had been passed down from his generations, this story, and it had happened to a great uncle of his. That was the Gogol story, The Cloak. But anyway, Mrs. Kissel was great, and she was very encouraging. And then when we got into creative writing, she assigned us a task of writing a story about an inanimate object. And she wanted to have a beginning, a middle, and an end, not just a description of an inanimate object. So kind of sparked something. I'm going to try and remember the story, okay? So what I wrote about was these two paper clips are in a drawer, and they meet. And they get along great because they got a lot in common, both in the drawer together. And they spend a lot of time together, and they develop a really nice relationship. And now they grow older, and they become wire hangers, right? And they're all grown up now, and as hangers, they're put away in the closet, and they fall in love. They're two hangers. And they have a wonderful time in that closet because throughout winter. And then spring comes, and the owner of the house has to get something out of the closet. And sure enough, their love has blossomed. And when he opens the closet door, they've given birth to a bicycle. Okay, that's the story. Mrs. Kissel loves this story, and she has me read it to the whole class. And she was very encouraging. And she just got my weird mind and sense of humor and everything. And okay, so this is 1966. About 1987, like 21 years later, I'm in Los Angeles. I've been directing television maybe 4 or 5 years, and I'm on this show called Moonlighting. And it's a big hit. It's a big show, and I'm directing a lot of episodes. And we had this episode that was the season finale, and it had aired in the East, and my phone rings, and I pick up the phone, and she says, "Is this Alan Arkush?" And I said, "Yes." She says, "I don't know if you remember me. My name is Ruth Kissel. Mrs. Kissel found me." And I said, "How did you find me?" She says, "You're in the phone book." And she says, "I've been watching Moonlighting. I've been watching St. Elsewhere, following your career. I am so proud of you. When you wrote that story about the paper clips," I said, "that kid's got something. And I just want you to know, it just makes me feel so good that you're succeeding." And I'm thinking, makes you feel good. You stayed my ass, Mrs. Kissel. And it was just a lovely, lovely phone call. And sure enough, 8 or 9 years later, I'm directing Ally McBeal, and I do the episode with the dancing baby. Phone rings. "Mrs. Kissel, I still got my eye on you. That's a great episode." She had really good taste because that's 2 of the best things I've done. And she passed away about 5 years ago. When I found out about it, I wrote a piece that they ran in the Bergen Evening Record next to her obituary, just thanking her for, all the things that she did for me, because she was great. Okay. Now, it's time, I think, to talk about the white whale. Yeah, the white whale. Now, you've all know about Moby Dick, the white whale. That's that monster out there that Ahab and all that, they want to capture that monster. They want to ride it. They want to get in sight of it. Is it the devil? Is it God? Is it just a giant whale? Well, the white whale that I'm talking about is in movies, and there's only one. And I got to see this white whale when my father said, you ought to stay up and watch this movie, Citizen Kane. So I'm a senior in high school, and I watched Citizen Kane on TV, and just like every other movie mad kid, blows your fucking mind. I mean, the story, the melodrama, the characters, the structure, the way it moves from story to story, and spoiler alert, Rosebud's the sled, Anyway, I couldn't stop talking about it enough to my friends, and we find out it's playing in New York City on a Sunday at the Bleecker Street Cinema. So we all go down to the Bleecker Street and go see Citizen Kane, and we just couldn't stop talking about it. It was one of those bonding things with friends, and hanging up in the Bleecker Street Cinema, we take the schedule. So I'm poring over the schedule at home, and I see that there's two really famous movies, because I've read about them, I've never seen them, playing in the coming weeks. And so the idea is that we're going to take a snow day, right? And we're going to go down to the Bleecker Street to see these two movies. Now, it luckily was playing on a Jewish holiday, and you know how observant I was. So I don't have to go to school because it's a Jewish holiday. Hardly anyone noticed that. And we even go to the UN, join in the march against the Soviet Jew problem and stuff. So we go down to the Bleecker Street Cinema. And the first of these two movies is Jean-Luc Godard's Breathless. And the second movie is Fellini's 8½. Right? It's like the peak of European cinema up to that point on one double bill. But before we go into the theater, we're hungry, and we go, it's the Eastville, it's a village, and there's all these Italian delis and stuff, and places that bake fresh bread. All you gotta do is follow your nose. We went into one of these bakeries and got some Italian fresh bread. I mean, it smelled so yeasty and it was hot. We took it into the theater and ate our way through. Breathless was on first. Now, if you know anything about Breathless, it's a very romantic story about a small-time hood and the girl who's a free spirit that he's crazy about. And it stars Gene Seberg and Jean-Paul Belmondo. And here he is. He's always wearing a cool hat, and he worships Humphrey Bogart. And, I mean, could she be cuter, in that T-shirt? And the short pixie hair, it caused a big fashion sensation. That's where Mia Farrow got it from. Gene Seberg really came into her own. This movie was a worldwide smash. And, I mean, who wouldn't fall in love with this woman? Later on, she'd done a couple of movies, and she got involved with a lot of European nightlife and so forth, and she started giving donations to the Black Panthers. And the FBI hounded her to death and made her life miserable. She ultimately, sadly, committed suicide. But for that hour and a half watching this movie, I was entranced. And here's another wonderful image from it. The two of them on the street in Paris. I've seen this movie 20 times. In fact, when I did a student film, I did an homage to it. It's just one of those movies that if you're a film student or you're anybody, you just love this movie. But as much as I love that one, man, this one just put me over the top. Fellini's 8½, the imagery, and it has all these flashback sequences, which I always love, these fantasy sequence, and it opens with a dream. And the main character, played by Marcello Mastroianni, dreams that he's flying above the traffic and then flying above a beach. And that's his leg, and he's attached like a kite. And in the next instant, he falls, and he wakes up in bed, reaching up with his arm. Now, this sequence, just to show you the impact of it, I copied it shot for shot and put it in Heroes, one of my episodes of Heroes. The imagery in this movie, all the women of his life, he has this sort of vision that they're all together, carrying him around. He's trying to make a movie, but he doesn't know what the movie should be about, so he's going through his whole life, trying to pick which part. So he keeps imagining different combinations of people in his life. Meanwhile, his own marriage is breaking up, But he's had a mistress who's with him, and his wife shows up, and he's in Claudia Cardinal's, his favorite movie, star, and she's going to star in this movie. And there they are having dinner, and there's a sequence in the movie where a mind reader, who's an old friend of his, asked him to come up and be part of this act. And so Marcello Mastroianni, Guido, is thinking about 3 words, and the mind reader goes, "What does this mean?" And he writes out the words. They're Asa Nisi Masa. And we find out, because there's a flashback, that it's a magic spell that all the kids used to say, and it's beautiful, sequence where the camera is just swimming around the room and the shadows and everything. And these kids are being put to bed by the parents. They're all cousins and everything. And when it's dark, by candlelight, they look at this painting of Jesus across the room, and they know when they say the magic spell, Jesus' eyes will follow them around the room. I mean, this is about halfway through this movie, my head just exploded. I couldn't take anymore. And there, towards the end, all the people in his life follow him around in a big circle, the circle of life, because he can't make the movie. He can't make sense of his own life, and so he shoots himself or he kills the movie. It's kind of unclear. After 40 years of seeing this movie and seeing it 50, 60 times, it still tells me something. But the thing that it always has told me, and the thing that makes it work so well, is the last image of him as an innocent little boy playing the flute. I mean, it's an amazing movie. And on Sunday mornings, there was this film show on TV. It's like on at 8 in the morning, like a local station. And it was this professor from NYU Film School, the head of film history. And he'd talk about movies. And like 3 or 4 weeks later, he's talking about 8.5. And he says, I always remember, he says, 8.5. I divide the world into 2 types of people. Those people who don't like 8.5, I don't talk to. The people who think 8.5 is the most profound movie ever made, those are my friends. And then he gives this sort of really technical exegesis on 8.5, which really explains to me a lot about that movie. And now it's spring. It's April. The envelopes are going to arrive. And as anyone knows who's been to college, if they're thin, you're out. If they're thick, you're in. And the day arrives, and I get all my envelopes. And I get 4 thin ones and 1 thick one. The only school I get into is University of Bridgeport. And I'm on the waiting list of Rochester, and I don't get into Brown. So I had picked the wrong schools. I had not done a great job filling those forms out. I just, And to say there was an explosion in my house, it was a panic. Everyone's dreams and hopes for me were down the toilet. And they couldn't have been madder. And the next day we go in to talk to Mr. Cancelosi, right? And Mr. Cancelosi is going to give us advice on what to do. And basically, he says, let me ask around, and he finds out that one school that he has been dealing with that has a couple of kids from Fort Lee High School just got admitted, and is Franklin and Marshall College in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And he speaks with their admissions person, and they have an opening. But much to my father's anger, it's neither pre-law or pre-med. They're all full on that. Mr. Cancelosi is pretty happy because the opening is for someone who wants to major in psychology. And he sets up an appointment for me to go and be interviewed by the head of admissions. And my father takes the day off from work, and we drive 3 hours to the Amish country, because that's where Franklin and Marshall is. It's among all the Amish. It's 1,500 men. There's nothing else around it but that school, okay? There's no movie theaters. There's no record stores. It's this all-men's school. And all the way down there, my father is lecturing me about what a fuck-up I am, and don't screw up this interview, and you better not be a wise ass like you normally are with your crazy opinions. You gotta grow up and get some sense in you, because this is your last chance, because you're not going to that University of Bridgeport. I'd rather have you go out and get a job or join the army and you go to Vietnam than have, So I get to Franklin and Marshall, and I go in for my interview. And I meet the guy, and he's really a straight-up guy, ramrod straight. And as we sit down, I look at the desk behind him, his desk, and look at the wall, and there is a big American eagle that he's got on the desk behind him with a flag in its mouth, He's obviously very patriotic, and he has a demeanor, my world history teacher, Mr. Kelly. So we start talking about psychology, and I'm doing the best I can to sell him on how much I really want to study psychology. And those other schools, I've learned my lesson about how to study and get into a school, and I really, really want to go to a place like this where I can just focus on my studies. And so he listens to me, blow a lot of smoke up his butt. And then he says, "You seem to be a pretty intelligent guy. What about current events? You ever read about current events?" I said, "Oh, absolutely. I read Time Magazine, Newsweek, Esquire, New York Times, Village Voice, all this stuff, Herald Tribune." And I start naming writers. And he says, "So, what do you think about Vietnam? Do you think we should be in Vietnam, or should we be like those protesters and get out of Vietnam?" So there's a loaded moment in my life, because I'd always prided myself, up to that point, being a teenager, of not compromising, and saying what was on my mind. And that always got other people often very, very mad at me. And I look at the flag on the wall and everything, and I start thinking about what would happen if I don't get into Franklin and Marshall, and what that ride back, 3 hours to Fort Lee, New Jersey, is going to be. So I start explaining, taking both sides of that Vietnam debate I had in Mr. Kelly's class. And I talk about what the Americans are doing there and what they have to gain, and, how we have to stop communism somewhere. And then I explain all that I know about the Vietnamese and how many times they've been invaded and how they've always seemed to fight off the invaders because they are strong people. And we are now fighting this war on their terms. I mean, get pretty technical in this whole thing. And he listens and he goes, "That's very interesting. You seem to understand this really, really well." I said, "Well, thank you." He says, "You're very well informed." He says, "Have any hobbies?" I said, "Oh, yeah. I mean, I love movies." He says, "Oh, we got a film society." I said, "Oh, that's great." He says, "Tell me, what's your favorite movie?" And I say, 8.5. And I'll tell you, I kind of divide the world up between people who don't like 8.5, I never talk to them, and the people who love 8.5. And those are the people that are my friends, because I think it's one of the greatest movies ever made. He says, "Really? I've never seen it. What's it about?" Thank God I remembered what that guy in NYU said, and I kind of explained all the imagery and stuff, 8.5, and he kind of stops me in the middle and goes, I don't understand what you're talking about, but you seem really well informed, and I love your passion. Let's go get your father in here, and we'll talk." So my father comes in. "How do you do? How do you do?" He's like so hyped up and everything. He says, he's a smart boy. And then my father does this. "I know he's a smart boy. I know he can succeed at this school." And he takes out his checkbook and he says, "Just tell me he's in and I will write you a check right now. You don't have to worry about filling this vacancy. He will be right here. I will write out the check for his tuition. I'll write, 2 semesters if you need to." It's so embarrassing. And this teacher's looking at my poor friend, and I think he kind of felt for me, because he says, "Okay, your son's in. No problem. I think he's going to do great here." And my father writes out the check, and we get in the car and we drive back. And on the drive back, I'm getting the lecture about, now that you're in this school, you better do well. And I know you're in psychology, but maybe in a year or two, you can switch over to pre-med and pre-law, You just got to get A's in psychology, etc. And I am sitting in this car realizing that the next 4 years of my life, I'm going to be spending it in Amish country. And, Bob Dylan doesn't play in Amish country. The Rolling Stones are not coming to Amish country. There's 1,500 men here, and this is my future, to study psychology. And like I said, it's one of the low points, This is my least favorite year. Okay? So all that's left of this year is for me to, go to high school graduation. Okay? I'll be back with what happens next to me and my huge dilemma.